Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Three Bone Theater's YouTube channel. I'm Tiffany Bryant-Jackson, education manager here. And today we have kind of my favorite day that ever happens with the show is when we get to talk to the playwright, Luis Alfaro. Thank you for joining us today and answering the plenty of questions I'm going to ask you about your trilogy as we prep to open Oedipus El Rey today. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. You're the only theater in America who took this challenge and actually did all three plays. I cannot believe it. I'm so humbled and grateful, and it's amazing to have that experience.
Thank you. It's been beautiful. When we first started looking into the plays, we had to think hard about how we would grow our relationships in our all of our communities to make sure we had everyone who could audition for the show. As you know, it's not always to capture young men to come and do a show, right?
Yeah.
And then young men of different cultural backgrounds sometimes it's not easy to say, no, come do a play. But we knew we had to build some relationships in different communities to make it happen. And we're so proud to have gotten to the last. Now, you did not intend them to go in order, correct? In no particular order.
No, I mean I had written Electricidad first, and then I'd done Oedipus, and then Mojada was the third. And I actually wrote two versions of Mojada, and then now I'm in the middle of a workshop for a Hercules. So, and that's six women. So, we'll see how that goes. All women of color. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, so I kind of feel like they all live in their own worlds. But the Greeks have been really kind to me, and I really love the way they connect us to modern audiences and especially younger audiences. It's been really amazing I think my favorite performances now are like student matinees,
I
right?
love it. Well, because it leads to it's a tie-in to what they're learning, right? We're tying
Yeah.
in the classic, but we're doing it in a way that they can relate. And I love that about your plays. I'm curious, you mentioned you started with Electricidad. What made you think, okay, I wrote this one, now I must do a trilogy of the Greek?
Well, it's weird to talk about it because, it's going to sound a little, I don't know, I guess maybe a little spiritual, but I will say that I usually just get out of the way of my own writing. So I was trained, and my mentor was a woman named Maria Irene Fornes, a famous Cuban American playwright. And I came to the theater after many years of being a poet, being a performance artist. But before that, I was an activist. And I've never stopped being an activist. So, I did a lot of demonstrations, and I've been arrested a lot for civil disobedience. I've helped organize protests. I've, done all of that, raise money, the whole bit. So I consider myself a citizen artist. So I had a period, 10 years, where I kind of lived around the United States in a different city every year, which is
Mm.
crazy. I do not recommend this for anybody. But and no car, I just would
Oh,
and
wow.
I lived in cities that were having like interesting challenges. So I was in Houston, Texas. I did a project with teen prostitutes. I was in Hartford, Connecticut. I did a project around poverty. I was in Medford, Oregon, which is the crystal meth capital of the world. So in every place I was sort of dealing with the social issue. So I was in Tucson, Arizona, and I was working with incarcerated teens, and Electricidad really came my way. So, what happens is that when you're investigating and you're full of inquiry and you get obsessed with something, that's when it all changes, right? And then the question, like the Greeks give you, is that the Greeks ask you questions, and I get a question and I start obsessing. Why are we still stuck in this desire to revenge? Why don't we have gangs, right?
Right.
And so every play has had a like question for me, and then that question or that fact or a statistic will lead me into telling that story. So, I never read the Greeks. I was raised in urban Los Angeles in the middle of downtown LA, and we didn't have like great education. So the
Mhm.
Greeks were not something that were part of my life. But when I started to read it, I was like, oh my God, this is such a contemporary story about today. And
Mhm.
my only job is to connect that thread, right? That ancient thread to what's happening today. The most amazing part about writing these plays is when they're being performed and then the audience Like, for instance, in Oedipus, as you will see, right, there's a secret there. And then
Hmm.
that secret gets revealed, and the audience goes, and you're like, oh my God, this has been going on for 1,500 years, and you
Right.
guys just real.
That happened with us when we did Mojada. At the end, people were like, "Oh my goodness," and we were like, "Did you read Medea?" And
I
we
know.
know not everyone, that spurred on a bigger conversation about like whose high schools made them dive into the Greeks and whose didn't, and so it was a
That's right.
bigger conversation.
I think it's the most amazing part of it. When I was in we've done a lot of productions of Mojave. One of my favorite was in New York because we did this. It was like a teen matinee, and I just
Hmm.
remember afterwards we had a post play, and people were like, "How did you think of that ending?" And I was like, "Well, it's not my ending, you know." But I love that. I love that
Yeah.
we can make anything that's old new again, right?
I
That's
do,
the thing.
and relevant to our contemporary youth right now. If any young adult is watching this, having those conversations about what is fate, where we belong, they're still key to their existence, even though it
Absolutely.
was key forever ago. So I do love
Yeah.
that about the trilogy because there's so many discussions, but I do love that you talked about it being spiritual. We had a conversation with a bunch of our artists. We have one actor who acted in Mojada and Electricidad, and she's assistant stage managing Oedipus right now. But she
Wow.
talked about having a feeling that she needed to come. And then once she was there, having that feeling of home and reconnecting with her
Wow.
ancestors through the work. So I'm curious, as you've been putting the work out there, are you receiving similar conversations from others as they see the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's most amazing for me is that I think a writer interprets, right? We translate. We're always translating. We're translating our culture. We're translating our experiences. We're really interpreting them for the audience. But the thing we never talk about is we sometimes we channel, right? And the channeling is not like, as we know, I was raised in a lot of spirituality. I was raised a strict Catholic and a very, very active Pentecostal apostolic. So yeah, that's a big part of my life, spirituality. And so I think what happens is that I think a lot about how we transfer stories to each other, and how we kind of connect our histories and our people and our and our people can be anybody, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody can have a way into a story. But yeah, I definitely agree that finding home sometimes happens in a story, right? The way you I don't know, I'm just writing these stories. I try to really get out of the way of the story and let the characters speak and tell their truth. And what they're saying is 1,500 years old. But
Yeah.
but also they're saying something that happened today, right?
Very much, and you are connecting back to cultures. We have a wide variety of Latinx creatives who have been a part of our project, and they talk about, even though they're not all Chicano, and they may not all come from Mexico. They all can recognize their grandmothers in some of these
Yeah.
characters. They can all recognize um, pieces of themselves and their history as they go in, and it's kind of been healing because more than once we've heard from the cast that this is one of the few places that they've been able to bring their culture to the table in a
Wow.
room, and be surrounded by other people who also speak the same language so they feel at home. So if though they can speak English and Spanish is comforting and they feel great in a room. I'm going to ask, maybe you knew, maybe you had a clue. Did you think that was going to happen as you were producing this work, that you would create such safe spaces?
I didn't think anybody would ever see it. You know what I'm saying? Like, honestly, the first one we were doing it in a community center with, incarcerated teens. So the only people who saw it were people who were in prison, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
was a beautiful audience. That was an audience that was like, "Oh my God, this is my story," right? And so I think that the humbling part of this is how many productions and who sees it and who gets access to it. And so yeah, for me, I never imagine I don't know, I never want to feel like I expect something. So everything's always
Right.
it's always a beautiful surprise, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, these people did it. These people did it."
Right.
It's so interesting to me because there's this production, and then right at the same time there's a production in Boston, right? I'm sure they're two very different experiences
Mm-hmm.
and speaking to very different audiences. But I think that the theater is, I'm in the business of feelings. So feelings is something we all share. Empathy is something we all share, right? So my only job is to create a feeling, right? To tell a story through emotion. And our audience will plug in to some part of that feeling that they might have. And so in that way, we're always sort of like connecting and translating and channeling, but yeah, I mean, I am as surprised as anybody by any of this.
I almost want to record them in those conversations and send it to you so you can see how much being involved in this work has done for some of our creatives on our teams throughout these three shows. Maybe I will, now that I know where to
That
find
would
you.
be beautiful. I just have to say that one of the things that's extraordinary for me is I was raised in an area that was very, very violent in downtown LA called Pico Union. And it's, abject poverty. Both my parents, I come from a farm worker family, so both my parents worked, and I had a very, very difficult upbringing. And so everything, when you come from something like that, everything is a surprise, everything is a blessing. There is nothing that is not a blessing right now, right? Every step of this is like, oh, this is an extra, And so what's amazing is to see that you can tell a story. I always had a journal when I was a kid, right? I always was journaling, right? And then when I got into poetry, I thought poetry was it, and the whole bit. But I really do feel like um, it's a miracle that these stories get out there. So that's cool.
I love your perspective. And I was having a conversation. I have adult children. One of them is accomplishing graduation at college right now. And he grew up with a single mother, all the stats against him. And so we were talking about these feelings we were having coming in when the world is stacked against you. And so every achievement
Right.
feels like, oh, wow. And it's just everything is beautiful. So it's really hard sometimes to be like, well, I could have done better. No, I'm here. Like, I
That's
love
right.
that bit of
I
your
told the story.
history.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always feel like, every draft, I think I could be better. And I feel like what's really kind of cool for me is that as I keep writing, because, art writing is a practice, right? So
Hmm.
playwriting is like, I always knew I was a writer, but I didn't know if I could accept the job of writer, if I could do it, right? But once you start
Right.
practicing the craft, it's interesting to get better at language. I grew up first speaking Spanish only, right? And so it even amazes me that I'm speaking English right now and speaking it, I think pretty well, so like in a way, I think, okay, that's like the major achievement. And then that every day I work on a new word, and I do all of those things that like make the writing of text so much better, that I'm starting
Right.
to understand how to be able to craft a story a little bit better. So sometimes I do look at them and I go, oh, I could have done that better. But you know what? It is what it is. It's a document of its time.
It is, and they're all beautiful stories. As you create more and grow more, I think it's always good to look back on that's where I was then, and it's still relevant, right? That work is
Yeah.
still on stage. That work is still changing lives. It is still sending a message, even in your current formation as someone who's matured a little more and has gotten into the practice of writing more, right? It's
Yeah.
still a beautiful thing to look back on because you essentially, Mr. Alfaro, have a legacy.
See, even that legacy is amazing,
You have a
right?
legacy, right? And I know
Yeah.
in your brain, I know you didn't wake up one day and said, I will create a legacy, but you have one, and that's beautiful.
Well, what's amazing is when you grow up poor, you're always poor. Like, somebody told me once, I won this amazing award once called the MacArthur Prize, the
Mm-hmm.
Genius Prize, right? And I remember everybody was like, oh my God, you're a genius. And I was like, not really. Like to be honest, I know they were like, you got money. And I gave a lot of that money away because it wasn't really, at the time, I really felt it wasn't my money, right? So I gave
Mm-hmm.
it away to organizations that supported me, like the LA Free Clinic, because I didn't have health insurance. So I gave them a chunk of my money. And I was thinking about this, and somebody said one day, well, do you not think you can live with money? I said, well, I know how to be poor. And so the nice thing about that is I know how to exist in the world and how to write and
Mm-hmm.
how to keep it simple and not get too complicated and the complexity feeling, just write the feeling and let other people find the complexity, right? But I do think that all of us as community, make our legacies, right? We make our communities, we stay with our people, we keep writing our stories. And, once I got this gray, I was like, okay, they're going to throw me out of the club. But, in a way, you just keep going, you just keep
Hmm.
going. And that's lovely. So I like to see us as a kind of like active ride, and you get off the ride when you die, you know? And
Yeah.
this is something you do for life, you
I
know?
love that. I love that you were on the ride and taking it in as it comes, but still at your root being who you are. I am curious now that you have one theater company in America who's done all. Do you hope that more will tackle the entire trilogy?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't gonna do a fourth, because I'd done Medea, I'd done two. I did a
Yeah.
play called Bruja that they did at the Magic Theater in San Francisco, and it was more about the sorcery. So then when I got to Mojada, I was like, okay, now I understand why I'm writing Medea, right? Then
Hmm.
now that I'm doing Heracles, I think kind of, okay, like you could create a body of work, and hopefully, yeah, I would love to sort of imagine a world where they even get done in repertory. Like, could you see one night and one another night? And do you
Oh, that
see
would
the
be so
and can
beautiful.
you see the same actors? Like the actress who's playing Jocasta, is she gonna play Medea? Like, could you see all of
Hmm.
that? So yeah, I get excited about those things because I also think that I don't know, you grow in community.
Yes.
I haven't been to your theater. I don't know your theater. I love the director, and I have like had these beautiful conversations.
Right.
So I feel, connected to the director, but I think a lot about how, yeah, this is my community too, right? Like it's been
Yeah.
a beautiful home for three plays. Wow, right? When does that happen?
Exactly.
That's exciting.
Listen, you now know us because I don't know how to tell you this, but we feel like we know you, and we've folded you into this community of work. And I will say your work resonates because our mission is to be a catalyst of conversation through theater. That's our entire goal. And so every show we produce has to have something we're talking about, and every show we produce also has a local community partner. So as
Oh,
we
that's great.
are talking about this subject, we don't want people to leave the theater and think, well, that's cool. I learned about what happens, in a prison system, but whatever. Like, we want you to leave and plug in locally so you can learn more or volunteer or give your time. So I think these plays have helped us connect in so many ways. We've had fantastic community partners through all three. And that's because the work speaks for itself, but also,
Wow.
as you mentioned, community is very important to who we are. And so it's helped us grow our community outside of who we are existing. I am a Black woman, our artistic director, manager. They're white women, right? So we are a team that at this moment does not have any Latinx rep. So how do we come into the community? How do we build it? And this show has helped
Mm-hmm.
us. These shows
Yeah.
have built it, and we've had such good relationships based off of it. Um,
Wow.
but I'm with you. I want to see if we had the budget, we'd love to do it. We don't have that budget, but I do love the tie-ins because we've got a lot of actors who've been able to do two out of the three shows.
Wow.
And then like Mariana, I mentioned she's done two as an actor and one as the assistant stage manager to stay plugged in. And we've also carried over one of the grandmother from Electricidad. Her tattoo shows up on a character in prison in Oedipus El Rey. It's her likeness. She's given us permission. So we've tried to still tie in these
That's
families and
beautiful.
relationships. As you look at familiar photos, you're like, wait, are they related to? Are they in the
That's
same?
that's that's
A
beautiful.
little bit of magic.
I love the way you're talking about community too. When I think about the building of the plays, I would have never thought that I would work with the Getty Museum, right, which is this
Mm-hmm.
huge international museum. And I work with the people at the Getty Villa. So I started there with the first one, right? And they gave me
Mm-hmm.
advice. And then, on Mojada, like one of their ancient scholar people was like, "Oh yeah, let me tell you how it really works," right? And then it got really deep, right? So that's one aspect of community. But then the other
Mm-hmm.
one is we have an organization here called Homeboy Industries, run by a priest, and it's really amazing. It's like a $50 million center where you can get out of your gang. They take off your tattoos. You get a job. They have a bakery, the whole bit, right? And so they help me. and their speakers bureau, right? And so Oedipus came out of that, meeting
Hmm.
somebody in there, and then they got me connected to local prisons and the whole bit. So in a way, I think it's like every time you do a play, you should have a partner. Even if the
Hmm.
partner is like a bakery, or even if the partner is like somebody in the community that just happens to know something. That is the building of the kind of trust, right? And then when you think about it in terms of the Greeks, what I love about the Greek festivals that I start to understand so deeply now is that I used to think that the Greek festivals were like now, where you go because it's a party, right, with the
Right.
thousands of people. But in truth, the Greek festivals were like, there's a war going on. How are we going to talk about this war? Let's do a play about it. Right. So in
Exactly.
a way, like sometimes people will say to me, couldn't you write something funnier and sweeter? And I'm like, yeah, I write those too. But
Right.
what I really want to do is talk about what's going on in culture and community.
Hmm.
And I want to celebrate community, but I also want to talk about what are the challenges of community these days. And
Yes.
we have some really big challenges, right?
Yes, we're on the same wavelength. People accuse us of not having happy endings in all of our shows, but they're contemporary shows. You could have laughed for 95% of the show, but there may be a moment where you're going to cry or be shocked because that's just the land we live in now, right? And
Well,
so,
people talk to me
yeah,
a lot about sensuality and violence, right? And I say, well, listen, for every act of violence in my play, there is a moment of tenderness. There is
mhm,
in New York, we had a really interesting a challenge with Oedipus because, we had this guy who was sort of a little celebrity, I would say, and
right.
he got there was a nudity scene, and people were saying that's the most offensive scene, and I said, what's offensive? The scene where he kills his father. That's offensive. Violence in our community is offensive. You know what?
Exactly.
Two people loving each other, that's not offensive
The
to me.
beautiful thing.
Yeah, like so I think the challenge is how do you convince the culture too to say, you
Hmm.
know, why do we embrace violence on stage in the way we do? And I love the violence on stage. I love the theatricality, I love what
Right.
it's saying. But also in that same way, I want to, you know, counter it with this sense of real love, right? And
Yes.
there dare I sound like some sort of pervert? This is a love story. This is a love story that was never meant to be, but it is ultimately a love story of two people who are completely lost in the world, right? Who find themselves in their grief, right?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's important also. So those moments where the audience is like, "Wow, this is so intense." Yeah, but it's also, I hope there's softness in there, right? I hope there's
Yes.
hope, and I hope that I did when we did this play in Chicago. I always remember this that I was sitting behind this guy and he was like he was disturbed by the play. And afterwards he raised his hand. We had a post play and he goes, "You're a pervert." And I go, "I am?" And he goes, "Yes."
Oh,
How did you even think this up? And I go, "Well, it wasn't me. It was this guy named Sophocles." And he goes,
right.
"Is he here? I want to talk to him." And I said, "No." But you know, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing. If you could remove, yes, the aspect of them being mother and son is not pleasant, but they don't know that, right? They're coming to each other at a time where they need each other, and they don't know this piece of their existence. And so you cannot be mad at the two of them for falling in love and finding home in each other when their worlds, respectively, are crashing down around them, and what they have is each other. That's solid to them, right? And then obviously there's a reveal, and then life
Well,
cannot be pleasant.
I also love the vulnerability of a moment. I don't need to see, like I always tell people who want to do the sex scene, I was like, don't do the sex scene. Well, you know what's really intense is the vulnerability after you've made love to somebody. And she says to him, who are you? Who were you? Who were your people? What do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And she says to him in this scene, if I remember correctly, she says, I never flew, meaning I never left. I never got to be myself. I never got
Mm-hmm.
to be the person, my possibility, right? And I
Right.
think that's really important because in our culture, often this is something I hear, especially from young people. And I'm an educator, so I work with 19-year-olds a lot,
Right.
and it breaks my heart when a young 19-year-old doesn't believe in themselves. And that happens a lot, right?
It
And
does. It's
so
unfortunate.
and you want to say, listen, your possibility is just beginning. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have to believe, right? That if you don't plant that seed. So my only job as an educator is to plant the seed of possibility in somebody. What they
Yeah.
do with it is what they do. And I think of that in the same way that I think of a play in theater, right?
Right.
I'm just planting the story here, and it's your job as an audience to take what you will from it, you know?
Yes. And I think all three of the shows have questions to ask yourselves when you leave, right? They
That's right.
don't necessarily end up in the happiest places, but that's where you get to have a discussion on, do I think my life is led by fate? Do I think I have a choice in what my future is? And start having those internal conversations with yourself. And so while it did not work the way we wished it would have worked for Oedipus, for me, an audience member leaving this play, I can decide how I want to take the reins of my life and where I go with that. And I think all plays do a beautiful job of that for people. So I'm hoping as people
Mm,
leave, they are asking questions of themselves on
yeah.
what works in their lives and how they build, you know, what becomes. I always go back to the bit of the song from Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story, right? Like who gets to tell your story for you? You do. And I'm hoping that people leave these shows and go, oh, okay, yes, Sophocles wrote it a trillion years ago. Luis just told me in a contemporary way. Now I get to take the context and themes and look at my own life and examine my thoughts. That's, kind of my hope with all of our audience members.
I love that. I think in the end, this play is really just about destiny or fate, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's asking a question of our contemporary audience to say, when a young man is not given any of the opportunity in his community to succeed, and he makes a choice, is that
Mm-hmm.
choice destiny or is that choice his fate? And so I did this program in Washington, D.C. when we did this play. It was a literacy program with adults.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew how to read. So it was really extraordinary. And so they came to see the play, and I said, okay, so we are now in the literacy program, and I want to ask you a question. How many of you are here learning how to read because you decided that you were ready to do this and you were going to take this moment and make something of your life? And all the hands go up, right?
I
And I
love
go,
it.
now, how many of you are here because God put you here? Your story is already been written in the books. How many of you believe that God landed you here and this is just part of your narrative, your great story that's been written for you? And then all the hands go up. And I said, you can only pick one. And they started screaming at me,
Right.
right? And
They're
I
like,
said,
wait a minute.
but that's the story of the play, right?
Yes.
Is he destined to fail? Or is this just his fate? And so
Yes. I
it's
love
interesting.
that.
Right?
Listen, again, I can talk for 1,000 years about this trilogy, about the effects that plays and storytelling have on our communities. But alas, I do have to let you get back to your real life. So my final question is, what do you hope that every bit of the community, whether it's the audience members, the creatives, the actors, will take away from being in a city where they got to witness the trilogy?
Oh my gosh, I always feel that m- uh, progress is incremental. As a political activist, I know that. I spent many years in the HIV/AIDS community,
Mm-hmm.
but also working in people of color communities around economic issues, right? And about I call it the violence of poverty, right? And I always think it's not going to change overnight. So
Yeah.
I think that every story is incremental. It's a step forward in understanding something about what makes us human. And so my hope is with the actors, with the audience, with the crew, with anybody working on a play, that you go, oh, this was an interesting experience where I learned one interesting thing about myself that changes the way I see the world and makes me act in the world. So my hope is always that the audience is going to go, well, this makes me want to think about how I might want to get involved in young people's lives, right?
I
Yeah,
love
that's the
that.
hope.
Listen, that's my hope with every show we do. I have a discussion guide that I create with every show. And on the set of questions, we have movie recommendations, books you could read, podcasts you could listen to, but also the questions to ask yourself. We have some members who do it with their friends. I have one social group. They come to the matinee and then they go to lunch and they talk about it. But in
Beautiful.
that question, there is always a question of how can you take what you've just seen and how can you shift your thoughts to
Mm,
be helpful in the world around you? Where can you plug in?
mm,
So I do
mm.
love that that's your final thought, because listen, if you were said to be a genius, then maybe I'm also a genius,
You are. You
because
are. We
we're
all
great
are.
minds. Great
We all
minds.
are. We all are genius.
There you go.
Nobody's told us that.
That is the key. No one told us that. Well, you're telling me, because I'm gonna claim it from here on out.
Perfect.
Thank you again for your time today. I will definitely send over some clips of the conversation we had so you can hear what the artists themselves are saying about being a part of this trilogy.
Oh, beautiful.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for hanging out with us on YouTube. We appreciate it. And I can't wait to see the next show, because, I'm interested to see how you contemporarily tell Hercules' story. I'm excited.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day. Everyone watching, this is your chance. We open tonight. You have 3 weekends to catch the show. We have already sold out opening night. So this is your warning. If you have not gotten your tickets, get it now. There are no excuses. We do this with every show, and then you come to me later and you say, "Oh, Tiffany, it's sold out." I know. That's why I'm telling you, get your tickets now. Okay, you have 3 weekends, no excuses. See you. Come wrap up the trilogy beautifully and stay with us until next season. All right. Bye, YouTube.